Hey, I'm Tom Stanton with TimberTrails.tv, and we'll take a look at what it's taken for us to get from this conceptual design for the Lil Rustico to where we are right now, and that's really with two side walls up, which was a monumental effort, as it is with anything. Of course, the challenge here is those raked front and side walls. You'll hear me say that a million times because it is a challenge, and it's made it quite fun. This is the original North Rustico lighthouse that we used as an example. There are other videos I've mentioned as to why these lines are here. Just suffice it to say that it's nicely balanced. It's really a cool looking lighthouse, at least in my own personal opinion. And when I looked at it, I said, man, that ought to be at a tiny house. And so that's down the trail that we've traveled. This is a breakdown of the different components of it that's also highlighted in another video. It shows you the lighthouse up here in the corner, the breakout of all of the different wall segments, the roof for the top and different parts, what it looks like when it's in its sleeper mode, and what it looks like when it's in its eater mode, because you got to have a snack sometime. And this is where we took all the pieces for the build. Essentially, I laid it all down on the floor so we could look at what it took to build it. We could all zoom in on it, and everybody that was on the build team would have a chance at understanding how the wall structures were planned to come together. Now, we've made a few modifications, but by and large, we are basically 95–97% on the money here with the difference between what was planned for the build and what the build has become with the components that we've built thus far. Started with taking apart the wiring. Hey, it was a hack job about 2 or 3 times. If you've ever owned one of these trailers, you know it's easy for the wires to come loose. And rather than deal with the old wiring, I decided to go ahead and just start from scratch. I have not yet wired it. It's an easy thing to slack on, and so, yeah, I just took the wire nuts off and I've been slacking. We started with John, came over on Friday, and he and Thomas and I started to work on the deck for it. We figured we could get a little bit done before the major part of the build, and it wasn't going to take away from the experience for those who were there. So this is the platform for the for part of it before we started to rip the sidewalls. So this is the heavier grade ply that was used for the sidewalls. That's just one of those abstract shots I like to take. Yeah, you know, nothing looks cooler than a table saw blade. Here Thomas is blowing all the junk and trash out of it. We had a piece of plywood on top of that thing for the last 10 years, so it was important to get all of the junk and the trash out from under it because that kind of stuff does end up holding water. The water, of course, is the enemy to wood, and therefore we wanted to blow it out. So he blew that out, did a great job with it, then went ahead and started to add some of the black paint to the major portions and cross members. Because the Lil Rustico can come on and off that trailer, we'll be able to basically roll it off, get it off the trailer, and I plan to take it to a place where I can get a nice new paint job shot on it, because if you've ever tried to paint one of these, you know nothing nothing sticks better than factory paint, and certainly not the kind of stuff you get in a spray can. This was where we worked out the sidewall designs. As you can see, we have a little 2x piece here. This is a treated piece down on the bottom, the plywood that John had, and then the rabbet that he was going to cut, that's a slice out of the wood. The rabbet that he would cut for the 2x6 that's going to sit on top of our angle iron that is the primary part of the trailer, and we ended up adding a little bit of a spacer here since the fender sits below that angle iron. John reckoning out the actual sidewall heights, and here he is. This is John ripping one, if you ever wanted to see that. I don't know that I did, but hey, he does rip plywood great, does this by eye. This is part of his profession. He is a home improvement expert, and so when it came to the build, he gave us invaluable advice as to how to move forward. Of course, he's a smooth man with ripping plywood, and if you've ever ripped plywood, you know that that is no easy task, especially when you're leaning across the saw blade. What it did, though, is it gave John and Thomas a little bit of a smaller piece to work with. So here John's taken his cut from the long rip he did with the circular saw, and he and Thomas pass it through the table saw. So while I'm taking this picture, I've got one hand on the camera, and the other hand is actually helping separate this small piece from the main piece because you don't want the blade to bind up. And here's John giving it that nice, easy push. I've got another hand again on it, holding it up against the fence, because that's what you don't want to have happen, is either to twist it against the blade or have it hop off the blade. Hey, I'm a photographer. I like abstract photos, and sometimes the things that you find right on the floor are art. Those are two of my shots that I happen to think looked kind of cool just sitting there by themselves. And speaking of looking cool standing there by yourself, there's Mr. John Rayfield himself, looking real sly and studly. John is an old school surfer from Virginia Beach from way back in the day when surfing was brand new. So a shout out to the VAB baby and John and all of his surf dog friends. This is my first attempt at using a table saw. Of all the tools I've ever used, I haven't owned a table saw and haven't ever really cut on a table saw. So this was my first cut through a table saw, and I've got to say I think I didn't bind the blade, and that is a good thing. So we kept working on the sidewalls here, started to put it together. We put our new sheet of the treated plywood on the bottom, and John suggested that we shim it up. The 4x8 trailer is made to hold 4x8 sheets of plywood or any other material like that. The thing is, it's not as exact as we'd like, and so there's a little bit of slop, which makes it easy to get the pieces of wood on and off. But what John suggested we do is to center that plywood up on the trailer, and that's what you see us doing here, is using some shims to get it nice and square regardless of how the trailer came from the factory. And then Thomas and John and I started popping the 2x2s down here in the bottom to provide for the outer rail, and started adding in the little side pieces here that are going to give it some more structure and eventually a nest for some of the insulation that we picked up to drop into the floor. So we will have a nicely insulated floor. If it's warm in there in a cold night, we're at least not going to be putting our feet down on what is essentially cold, transferred through the expanded steel metal floor, transferred through the treated plywood, and that would be cold. So hey, mornings are a lot easier like that. John continuing to work his pneumatic nail gun here. Another one of those abstract shots, just the way the screws were laying. Again, I thought it looked kind of cool, so I just took a picture of it. I do that kind of stuff. And here Thomas and John are working out, I forget exactly what they're working out. I think it's the way that the 2x2s are going to work out on the floor. This is the finished box by the end of the first night that we had. So we brought it inside. We got it so that it wouldn't rain onto it, because we've basically made a nice bucket for the rain if we leave it outside in the rain. We want to keep it dry, so we brought it inside. And at the same time later that evening, Midge and I ran around with some brushes and we added some primer to the outside, which protects that end grain to keep water from starting to seep inside of it and have it expand while it's in the middle of the build. Until we lock it in with a good tight paint, we're trying to protect it from the weather, especially humidity. Just an example of what it looks like there. This is it in its raw state before we ended up adding the primer to it. Now this is the start of the first, the following day. So this is the build day when we had the crew on site. We took a look at the plans, everybody went downstairs, and John had previously cut the rabbet, that's that little L shape that's notched out here, into this 2x6. So this becomes our new side rail that is going to allow us to have those raked sidewalls and give us just a little bit more interior space. We're holding it on with the clamps because we've got some construction adhesive in there. The clamps help hold it down, and then we went through and did some tack nails to hold it in place while we then followed up with some finished screws. And here's John tapping a hole for the screw so that it goes in without splitting the thin edge off of the edge of the wood. And here we go again with everybody starting to get busy handling tools. Robert is getting his first instruction and a shot at how to handle the impact driver. He picked that tool up like just a wild man, and he was set for life as far as being able to handle an impact driver. Both of our guys, Seth here as well, real fast learners picking up some of these tools for the first time. The basic concepts on top of holding the tool in your hand and to how it works, and they performed excellently. So both of these guys plan to build their own tiny houses, and this gives them that, excuse the pun, platform on which to stand. And side by side, I don't think they're racing, but we can say that it's racing. It looks like Seth is going around turn number 2. Oh my gosh, Robert comes around with a slingshot. He looks like he's going to make a bid for the finish. And yeah, pop, pop, pop. And they screwed all the screws in. little detail shot of the screws going in and pushing it in. Using an impact driver, it makes it easy for this to kind of hammer and twist at the same time, which is a dance from the 50s, but for our purposes it also works with the shall we say, the screws. And these guys were going through and countersinking, getting the heads of those screws down below the wood surface so we can add some filler to it and keep it nice and clean when it's done. Now we picked up that tub and stuck it down inside the trailer. We again shimmed it back up to get it centered, and we cleaned the floor because we started to lay the plywood down on the ground. So John's preparing some more pieces here. Once we got the plywood down on the ground, our finished edge is on the bottom side. That's why we swept it. And then what I set about to do was to develop essentially a template upon which we could begin laying our 2x3s. So since I was the designer in SketchUp and understood what I was trying to do here, in the physical world I began to lay out the 2x3s and put them down and work out the actual dimensions regardless of what was in SketchUp. Now that we're in the physical world, we'll deal with those more absolute numbers. Now part of what I wanted to do was to bring some of those familiar shapes that we're, as people of this era, familiar with, and the 16 by 9 is an HD sort of size for a television. A lot of the widescreens that we have are 16 by 9, and I felt like this type of proportion would be readily accepted by people and provide for these framed views from inside of the trailer. So that was one of the windows, and this is in the tower side of it. As you can see, John and the guys went ahead and ripped the other 4x8 sheet down because that provides, over here above the little signature, that adds the that's the top of what will eventually be the cabin's sidewall. We started laying the 2x3s directly on top of it, and starting with the one that was in the front first. And John's showing everybody here how to actually, you know, he's going to blow something up, and that's why everybody's got their hands over the ears. No, no, no. Protection of your ears and your eyes is definitely important. And what John's doing is showing how to use the compound miter saw. Since the sidewall is raked, the front wall is raked, we determined that it was about a 6.5 degree difference between what would be vertical and what was the raked wall, and so he had to set his saw up to cut that in both of those planes. And there's my sweet honey bringing back food and other things. Midge kept us well food and watered throughout the entire event, and thank you, honey, for that, because without it we would have been a bunch of angry guys slinging hammers at each other. So here's the template on the floor, and again that first piece, this took us a while to get right, and it wasn't like we, I think we did actually mess up one or two of the first sticks that we cut. They ended up being used for smaller stuff, but getting that piece down and correct first was the foundational member of the build around which the rest of the pieces could start to come together. So here the guys are laying it right on top of my template. We're getting those cuts done right. We're trusting the squares for square, not necessarily what Tom used as the, that was me, I'm talking about myself in the first person here, used to scribe it down onto the ground. And it seems like an argument ensues. No, I'm just kidding. Everybody has to work. Took us a while here. This took us the better part of the day to get this thing down because there are so many weird little angles to it. But as you can see, as night starts to fall, we've got most of the pieces in place. This really starts to look like a wall at this point, and it's an irregularly shaped wall, which has given us a whole lot of challenges, but it also meant that the folks who came to this were on a fast track to understand how to do a lot of the more complex woodwork here. This is the top of the tower, and this is where a rafter will drop into here. Another rafter is going to drop into this portion, and then also over here as well. I think that's what this is. I believe that's what this is. Yeah, you can see it at the top right here. And so that's the top of the tower, and where the rafters across the tower will go from side to side. This is the other part that is considered the cabin, and we left this for the following day. We did have some rain, so yeah, we made ourselves a nice little jackleg carport, you know. And as a good old boy and me wanted to keep that thing up there. Once it got a little bit dry there, the end of the following day, I had to take that down because I didn't want the neighbors to get all upset. But I did think that was pretty cool. And it did work for us because it did rain pretty heavily a couple of times, and it kept water off of the trailer and out of the tub. Of course, the kitty likes to sit on the roof of the car. He was watching the entire thing from the side, and he's ready to jump on in and get up under that tent as soon as we go inside. Now, this is what it looked like at the end of our first build day on Saturday. And laying on the floor, you can see the sizes and dimensions of everything. The reveal along the bottom is where the bottom plate, that 2x6 with the rabbet cut, sits on the trailer, and so we've left that reveal at the bottom, and when we actually tack this on, we've accounted for that. There's about a foot of slop at the top here, mainly because there's no sense to go too tall with this. As it is, if I stand inside of it and raise my hand as high as possible, I will barely touch the rafter, and the windows here are at the height of our eyes. So again, why overbuild this? Look at that. That's a manly man right there. Oh, yeah. And a professional actor to boot. And here the guys are starting to cut some of the pieces for, I don't remember what, but they're cutting the pieces there. And another argument ensues. No. John is a master teacher, and he is giving good instruction about something that we're doing and something that we're doing there and something that Seth has in his mouth and wished I hadn't taken that picture. And Midge bringing more food and snacks. And I mean to tell you, if you are in the production business, a craft services table is awesome. And thank you again, Midge, for having us fed and watered. So we're getting ready to work here. We took the time to get prepared for the work, and to remind everybody how things are going to go, I went ahead and sketched this out really fast on the ground. Took an abstract shot, looking at the 16:9 window again. And these are the pieces that as we cut, we went ahead and doubled up our work. So the ones with the tape on it are actually marked as to what they will be when we start building the second wall, which we did on top of, after flipping it, on top of the first wall we built. So by building right on top, one on top of the other, we benefit from having taken all those decisions, and rather than redo it all from scratch, we're going to be able to just build one right on top of the other. And these are a few pieces from it. John had to go to the store. You know what? That's what a shopping list looks like when a builder goes to the local Home Depot or Lowe's. So with the cabin, one of the things I needed to work out was, again, a window placement. And here, it's hard to tell, but it's basically a CinemaScope 2.35:1 ratio that I'm using. Again, since that's familiar to us, a movie or CinemaScope point of view, I figured if you're going to sit there and you're going to stare out a window, that's deemed to be a proportion that we all know and are familiar with. And so once again, as a designer, chose to go, and a movie and TV guy, chose to go ahead and put into the design. As you can see, we've got the doubled up parts up here at the top. We're going to bring some cripple studs down, and then we've got the bottom sill with their supports kind of scratched in. Seth running the awesome DeWalt compound miter saw. And John reckoning out that 6.5 degree difference. He did that probably 250 times, going between 6.5 and 90 to get things just right. So these guys embarked on the what seemed to become like a longer than we all expected task of getting all of these pieces of styrofoam cut to drop down inside of the floor to make for the insulation. And while John and I worked on a lot of the framing, that's exactly what they did. So thank you, boys, for doing that, because I'm sure it wasn't the most fun task in the world. Now for the piece John's putting in there right now, this actually requires what's called a scarf. It's a real long, and he cut it with a skill saw. He cut it one way, flipped it over, had to cut it the other way, and dropped right off there. If you've ever had to do that, you know that cutting around a board, or in this case being able to cut something that was about a foot long as a long rip and then repeat it on the other side and have the piece drop right off, that's quite talented. And what it does is it matches then the back wall as a raked wall where it meets the cabin wall. And so he's tacking it in here with the air hammer and using, I believe it's staples in this case, to kind of hold this in place, and then we went back in with the impact driver and used screws to really kind of hold it in nice and tight. Just detail of that scarf joint, you can see his mark right here, and then it comes right down to the bottom. Nipped a little bit off once he was finished with it, because otherwise that'll splinter over time. So you take a shave just like a little bit off so that it ends up being about a 1/16 or an 1/8 of an inch down at the bottom of the scarf joint. Now that's the one that got away. Yep, Seth's telling that story again. We heard it about 15 times. I don't know what he was talking about. So here we are with the wall, I believe in a finished state. Yep, and John is using his Sharpie to really mark on there, not what my marks said the pieces ought to sit on top of, but when it was done and constructed with the real pieces, where all of those primary pieces actually sat. And that's going to help us when we go to sheathe it, that we can take that piece and lay it right up on top of it, get it lined up just right, tack it on probably with staples is what we're thinking, a little bit of filler over that, and then a nice clear finish of some sort to retain the really pretty side of the Luan. It has a beautiful veneer to it. Oh my gosh, if you're going to stare across the room at somebody in safety goggles and have a great look back, that's the look you're looking for. Or that look right there. Okay, so now it's time to move stuff out of the way because it's time to lift that wall up and flip it over to start building the other side. So all we did there was move a lot of pieces around, and then we did a raising. It didn't take all of us to do this, but in typical fashion for raising a barn, we decided to raise this wall together as a team since we had all worked on it as a team. Thank you, Midge, for taking that picture. And we tucked it up against the wall. And we all looked at it and said, man, look at that, ain't that cool? And it does look cool. It's awesome. And that's awesome too. That's what I'm thinking. Well, the big hell yeah. And a couple of shots of me posing next to the design from my mind that started on scratch paper, went into SketchUp, and actually then onto the Luan and came out in the real world. That's a very satisfying thing. And since my honey is going to go camping with me because we love each other and that's what we like to do, then she stands next to it and looks real cute as well. I love my honey. There's another picture of her. So here's Thomas dropping some of the pieces in. Now, even though these are about as exact as possible on a 16-inch center, doesn't mean every one of them's precisely cut exactly the same, so they had a lot of work to do to get them to drop in as tightly as you can tell that this one drops right in. We decided to, since we're going to cover something up, everybody put their signature onto the foam here, and little dates and other things. So if anybody ever takes this apart, they're going to find this, and it would be like a nice little either message in a bottle or a little time capsule. Something we've been doing with all of the construction things that we've done around our houses. I'll mark something up, and then we'll either paint over it. And it says, T.S. loves MS because I love my honey. Here Thomas is putting some of the glue on here, and John is doing some as well. Everybody, and then here's Seth doing some of the same. Really, because everybody was just standing there, we were moving fast at this point, almost as fast as I'm trying to talk, and being ready to drop this piece down on top of the floor. And it's in one shot there and another shot down. It happened that fast. And it was such a tight fit, air blew out of the corners, and it's a perfectly tight fit. So John goes through with the staple gun because we don't know how we're going to finish it. What we're planning to do is actually do a nice stain down there and then a urethane over it. So John's using his stapler to hold it down, and like doing a wood floor tongue and groove, that's going to give us a nice tight ability to go in there and put some filler in it and hopefully not see it once it's stained. And more stapling. And here's the other one. So in again about 3.5 hours we were able to build the second wall over the first using the pieces that we cut previously. So when we cut 2 pieces that needed to be the same, we cut 4. Taped those up, stuck them on the side. We had them marked, we knew where they needed to go, and so as this started to come together, we put all of the principal members together, we put in all the secondary members, and then we started to cut the little pieces that go across to fit the actual pieces of wood. And there's the team, sans John, because he's taking the picture this time of the folks that all helped do this. So now we raised it up and raised the other one up. As you can see, the way we've cut this, it sits flat on the floor here, but at that 6.5 degree angle, and this is approximately as wide as it would be when it's finished, so we just kind of wanted to, get in the space. Now remember, while I'm standing on the floor, the window looks low. When I'm in the trailer, it's another 8 inches down, so that's what gives us that height for the head to be right at the window height. This is John talking about spreading his wings and flying. No, I don't know. We're just having fun there. And the old mug for the camera shots. Why? Because you can. and my sweet honey, and my son Thomas, who is a huge help on this build, and Seth's big muscles and hairy armpit. Let's move on. Midge standing in it. So we to hold it in place and make sure that it was really kind of prepared to move out onto the trailer, we just tacked a couple of pieces across here. They're loosely and roughly in shape, but even there it continues to hold its integrity with just 3 little boards holding it together. And a look at it with the raked side walls and back walls. So the front wall is going to be built once we put the little joists across the top here and drop them down into these nests. I've got a couple of blocks to put in between it, but once we drop those 3 joists in, we'll be prepared to then match the front wall and put their little cripple pieces across the middle to really kind of hold that together. Nothing like kicking back and feeling a sense of accomplishment. And it's getting dark on our second day. This is what it's looking like, but we all planned to end at 3. We just wanted to keep on pushing through, so we got to where we end up getting ready to put the wall out there. It's starting to get darker and darker, and ultimately everybody took a quick look inside. Now what Seth is doing is he's actually knocking the cross members out so that we can take the wall, set the one wall down, pick up the first wall, and bring it out to the trailer and set it up. And once we set it up on the trailer, raise it up, get it flat on the plate. Once we've got it lined up, we know how it's going to fit. They leaned it back, and John went through and shot some construction adhesive down between the bottom plate here on the wall, as well as the plate that sits there on the edge of the trailer. And after the construction adhesive is in place, go through and start to, as they say, screwed and glued. Speaking of screwed and glued, there's me. Hey, hey. And there's my son. And here's our team continuing to screw this down together. Here's the second wall laying on the floor, getting ready to be put into place. And Seth and I lift it up and walk it out. Oh, Facebook crash. Hey, hey. That's always fun. Let's do something live and have Facebook fail on us. Then it failed again. Now there we go. Okay, second wall goes up, gets dropped into place. Same sort of dealio as before, yo-yo. Get it in place, put the glue in it. They got it kicked back for the glue. John's laying the construction adhesive in there, and this is that tough stuff that basically keeps the wood so tightly sealed together that when you break the walls apart, the wood chunks stick to the glue and the wood actually shreds. If you want something to stick together, that's what you want. So here I'm holding it nice and flush on the bow end of it and along the side. We started on this end and worked our way down because this bottom plate was just a little bit crooked. And by getting to the very end here, I am just giving it a good torque, so as John puts the screws down into it, it's going to help pull that nice and flush. Now, we've all seen curling, and I don't think this is curling, but it sure looks like that. Either that or Seth is about to catch Thomas unawares with a swift kick from the broom. And here's what the Lil Rustico looks like sitting on the trailer, which is up on its 4x4s, and it's all ready for the other parts to go together. We went ahead and covered it up. This is this morning. We covered it up so just in case it rained or there was a lot of dew in the night, we would not get too much water to drip directly down into it. And what's cool is I did spend some time in it this morning, kicking back and trying it out as if I'm flopping down in the bed and looking up at the ceiling from beneath what would be the cabin. This would be the cabin with the gable roof, and then up to the top of the tower. And a look at the cinemascope style window, which will have some trim inside of it as well, and predominantly on the outside, so it'll be framed inside these walls just a little bit. And this is the kitchen window from the height of my eyes, standing upright. And here I'm trying to reach that top 2x4 stretch, though I may stretch, and I still can't reach it. Once I pull this other rafter down here, I will be able to touch it, but that's how tall this is. It's close to about 7 feet or so, about 9 feet off the ground. And just a little recap to take a look at it there, a nice little, put it in sepia tone, make it a nice little memento. So that's essentially what we have. Of course, you can check this out on timbertrails.tv. Just go to the Little Rustico Tiny Lighthouse travel trailer. We've got 167 images in it right now. As we continue to build this, we'll continue to put more pictures out there and give a quick recap of what goes on with it. So again, this is Tom Stanton inviting you to continue to follow this build as well as many others. Remember to live large and go tiny.